The storm had started just before dusk, swallowing the quiet suburban block in a curtain of rain, the kind that blurred streetlights into soft halos and made even familiar houses look like strangers. In the distance, a single siren rose and fell, carried by the wind through the stillness. And inside a modest two-story home at the end of Rowan Street, a body lay on the polished hardwood floor, motionless, pale, and already cooling. The man who had once filled every room with laughter now filled the house with a suffocating silence. His name was Daniel Reeves, a 58-year-old widower with a gentle voice, a predictable routine, and a fortune he rarely spoke about. But tonight, everything he had built, everything he believed in, had been shattered. The living room lights flickered as the officers stepped inside, water dripping from their uniforms. They whispered to each other, careful not to disturb the eerie peace that had settled over the home. Nothing appeared forced. No broken windows, no overturned furniture. Just Daniel lying near the coffee table, his right hand barely brushing the corner of a stack of papers that investigators would later learn were updated will documents. On the mantel, framed photos showed a man who had rebuilt his life after profound loss. First as a grief counselor, then as a devoted father of two adult daughters, and finally as someone who believed he might be allowed a second chance at love. But that belief, investigators would soon discover, had been the first step into a deadly trap, because standing outside the house in a soaked trench coat was the woman who claimed she was Daniel's devoted new wife. Her name was Serena Hale, 36 years old, impossibly calm, and met by officers who later described her stare as cold even for a night like this. While the rain plastered her hair to her cheeks, she kept repeating the same haunted line, "He just collapsed." He said he felt dizzy and then he fell. She clutched her handbag like it was the only thing tethering her to the ground. And yet, even in the chaos of the moment, something about her tone felt rehearsed. Something about her timing felt too perfect. Something about her presence felt wrong. But before the truth could unravel, before investigators could pull apart the lies from the carefully woven narrative, listeners are drawn into a single question. A question that would haunt the Reeves family for years. Was this tragedy the cruel hand of fate, or the final step in a meticulously executed inheritance plot worth $5.4 million? Before we sink deeper into the chilling unraveling of Daniel's final 6 months, take a moment to let your instincts speak. Tell us in the comments, when love reappears suddenly in a grieving person's life, do you see it as hope, or do you see a warning? And as you follow this case, share the moment that made you realize something darker was unfolding. Your voice helps shape the investigations we choose next, and it helps us tell the stories that families are still searching for answers to. Daniel Reeves' story did not begin with betrayal. In fact, it began with a quiet, hopeful chapter, one many believed he deserved. He had spent 3 years mourning the death of his first wife, Marlene, who passed after a long illness. Friends recalled how he walked through those years like a man learning to breathe again. He attended support meetings, journaled obsessively, and threw himself into volunteer work with local hospice groups. His daughters, Julia and Mara, praised him for trying, for still believing life might have something gentle left to offer. In early spring, Daniel began spending time at a small bookstore cafe downtown. He liked the corner table near the window, where he could watch pedestrians pass while he annotated grief therapy volumes. The staff joked that he should have owned stock in their business with how often he came through the doors. And it was there, between the shelves of self-help books and the faint aroma of roasted coffee, that he met Serena. She stood out immediately. Fiery red hair, a soft smile, and the kind of polished confidence that made people pause. She was browsing books about caregiving and mental health, which struck Daniel as ironic in hindsight. But at that moment, he saw in her someone who understood pain, someone who carried secrets, but knew how to articulate them with gentleness. Their first conversation lasted 20 minutes. The second, nearly an hour. Within a week, she was asking about his life. Within 2, she was laughing at jokes he barely managed to get out. And within a month, she was the first thing he looked for when he walked into the cafe. Julia, his eldest daughter, recalled feeling unsettled from the moment she met Serena. She was too perfect, she said in a later interview. Her stories didn't match. Her timeline didn't match. And she always stared at Dad when he wasn't looking. Mara described her as a moving shadow, always present, always watching, always listening. But Daniel didn't see the cracks. Or maybe he didn't want to. After years of loneliness, hope felt like a warm hand on his back, guiding him gently toward the promise of something new. Reports would later suggest that Serena had a history of short-lived relationships with financially stable men, relationships that ended abruptly, leaving her with assets, settlements, or access to accounts she had no business touching. But none of that was apparent to Daniel in those first few weeks. All he saw was a woman who praised his character, listened to his fears, and assured him she wasn't intimidated by a man still grieving his late wife. Love doesn't erase the past, she once told him, according to Daniel's journal. It simply makes room for it. By the time summer approached, Serena had moved into Daniel's home. The transition appeared natural, even delicate. She introduced herself to neighbors with baked treats. She joined Daniel at charity events. She took photos of them on quiet porch mornings and posted them with captions like, "Healing comes in unexpected shapes." But beneath her charm, something darker simmered, something only a few observant individuals recognize. Daniel's best friend, Michael Trent, recalled one afternoon when Daniel mentioned considering updating his estate plan. "She didn't blink," he said. "Most people at least react to that stuff." She just squeezed his hand like she expected it. There were other signs, small ones at first. Serena began discouraging Daniel from seeing his daughters, claiming they held him back emotionally. She handled more of his medications. She insisted she help with finances, explaining that she had experience managing household accounts. Daniel pushed back at first, but grief can create blind spots, and love, especially rushed love, can make men believe in illusions. By late summer, Serena wasn't just sharing his home, she was shaping his life. And the real turning point came during a quiet dinner in September. The lights were low, candles flickering against the glassware, and a soft jazz record played in the background. That night, Daniel announced he wanted to marry Serena, just 6 months after meeting her. Julia left the table mid-meal. Mara argued with him in the driveway. Michael called him later that night, begging him to slow down. But Daniel insisted he finally felt alive again. Serena barely hid her satisfaction. They married in a small civil ceremony at the courthouse, attended only by two neighbors and a friend of Serena's, whose name Daniel's daughters never remembered hearing before. There was no reception, no family gathering, no shared celebration, just a marriage license, a quiet signature, and a new chapter that would later prove fatal. But what happened next, what unfolded over the next 6 months, would expose a web of manipulation, financial control, and chilling precision. Because the day after the courthouse ceremony, Serena approached Daniel about finalizing his updated will. She framed it as a practical step, a loving gesture, a way to ensure everything was organized should anything ever happen. Daniel, still blinded by affection, agreed, and with that agreement, his fate was sealed. Daniel's will sat unsigned on his desk for nearly a week, not out of hesitation, but because he wanted his daughters to be present when he finalized it. He hoped it would show them he still valued their future, that Serena wasn't replacing them. But communication between him and his daughters had grown strained. Calls returned late, messages growing shorter, and every time he expressed guilt about the widening distance, Serena assured him it was simply growing pains. She claimed they weren't adjusting to his happiness. She said they were jealous, ungrateful, stuck in the past. Reports suggest Serena began tightening her control gradually. She handled his appointments, organized his medications, and fielded his phone calls before they reached him. She even began attending his sessions with clients, explaining that she wanted to understand the emotional toll of his work. But investigators later noted that her presence wasn't supportive at all. It was monitoring, tracking, calculating. One night, Daniel's longtime attorney, Lewis Grant, received an unexpected call. Daniel wanted an urgent meeting the next day to finalize the will, but he sounded tired, almost distracted. He spoke slowly, Grant recalled, like he was choosing every word carefully. I sensed he wasn't alone in the room. And he wasn't. Serena paced behind him the entire time, whispering instructions whenever Daniel paused. He tried to wave her off politely, but she hovered like a shadow he couldn't escape. The updated will placed the majority of Daniel's $5.4 million estate in Serena's name, leaving a significantly reduced portion in a trust for his daughters. Grant questioned the drastic shift. Daniel brushed him off, saying, "It's just temporary. Serena thinks it's practical." But the way he said it, quiet, subdued, raised red flags Grant would later regret not acting on. Still, Daniel signed, and within hours, neighbors reported seeing Serena step outside with a phone pressed tightly to her ear, pacing with a triumphant energy that felt entirely out of place given the supposed tenderness of the day. One neighbor recalled hearing her say, "It's finally done. It's set." A chill crept through the Reeves household after that. The once warm, open home became a space filled with silent, careful movements. Daniel's daughters felt it immediately. They described visits where Serena watched every interaction with a rigid smile, stepping between them and their father during conversations, insisting she needed him to rest. Julia once found a pill bottle on the counter, half empty, though it had been filled the week before. When she asked about it, Serena claimed Daniel had been forgetting doses, and she was adjusting them for him. But the dosage didn't match the prescription. Daniel waved off his daughter's concerns, insisting everything was fine. But his voice trembled when he said it. The decline began subtle. Daniel complained of dizziness, fatigue, occasional confusion. Serena attributed it to stress. But by winter, his symptoms worsened. He lost weight. He slept at odd hours. His memory faltered. And yet Serena refused to take him to the hospital, insisting she could manage his care at home. One night, while lying on the couch with a blanket draped over him, Daniel confided in Michael, who had stopped by unannounced. "Something's wrong," Daniel whispered. "I don't feel like myself." Michael urged him to get medical attention immediately, but Serena appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, smiling thinly. "He's fine," she said sweetly. "He just needs rest." And Daniel fell silent. It would be the last time Michael saw him alive. According to a dramatized statement from a neighbor, the final night was eerily calm. Rain tapping against the windows, lights dim, Serena closing the curtains with slow, deliberate movements. Daniel sat at the dining table with a cup of tea he barely touched. His hands shook. His eyes were glassy. And for reasons investigators still debate, he seemed aware, terrifyingly aware, that something irreversible was happening. At approximately 9:22 p.m., Serena called emergency services. Her voice was steady, controlled. "My husband collapsed," she said. "He's not breathing." But paramedics found inconsistencies immediately. Daniel's body temperature suggested he had been down far longer than the timeline Serena provided. His bruising patterns didn't match a simple collapse. A glass on the table contained residue later identified as traces of medication Daniel was not prescribed. And yet Serena seemed unfazed, offering calm explanations for each detail. The medical examiner's initial findings labeled the death as sudden cardiac arrest. Yeah, pending toxicology. And Serena moved fast, far too fast for a grieving widow. She contacted the insurance company within 24 hours. She attempted to schedule a meeting with Daniel's bank the following morning. She informed the daughters that Daniel had wanted a quiet, immediate cremation, something entirely out of character for a man who had prearranged burial plans with his first wife years prior. Julia refused. Mara demanded an investigation. And as tension reached its breaking point, the toxicology report arrived. It exposed everything. Traces of sedatives were found in Daniel's blood, levels consistent with prolonged exposure. Medication he never had a prescription for. Medication that could induce the exact symptoms he had been experiencing over the past months. Investigators reopened the case. Detectives began interviewing neighbors, friends, and staff at the cafe where Daniel first met Serena. Patterns emerged, discrepancies surfaced, and the carefully constructed image Serena presented began to fracture. Her financial history showed irregularities. Her past relationships contained murky endings. Two former partners reported missing funds and sudden disappearances. One claimed she pressured him into updating his will. Another described her as a woman who changed personalities depending on what she needed. Detectives located a journal Daniel had hidden in his desk drawer. The last entry was incomplete, written in shaky handwriting. "Something feels off. I can't think clearly. I need to talk to..." The entry ended there. The pen mark trailing downward suggested his hand had slipped. When confronted, Serena remained composed. She denied everything, claimed Daniel had been depressed, that his daughters were manipulating investigators, that the toxicology report was incorrect. But as the contradictions piled up, her control deteriorated. Investigators noted her sudden shift in demeanor, eyes darting, hands trembling, voice growing sharp and frantic. A search warrant was granted. Inside the bedroom, beneath a drawer lined with velvet, officers found pill bottles with altered labels. Some empty, some nearly so. None of them in Daniel's name. Several contained residue matching the sedatives found in Daniel's toxicology report. In the kitchen trash, they found shredded papers, documents referencing Daniel's will before it had even been discussed with him. Papers Serena had no legal reason to possess. And in her laptop history, investigators found searches that chilled even the most seasoned detectives. How long for sedatives to mimic natural decline? Signs of medication overdose without visible trauma. Inheritance rights for spouse versus children. With mounting evidence, Serena was arrested. The trial lasted months. Prosecutors outlined a chilling timeline of manipulation, isolation, and deliberate poisoning. Serena's defense team argued she had been caring for a chronically ill husband and that grief had clouded her memory. But the facts were merciless. Witnesses placed her in control of Daniel's medication. Financial analysts identified unusual transfers into accounts linked to her, and the updated will, signed under suspicious circumstances, became a central pillar of the case. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours. Serena Hale was convicted of first-degree murder and fraud. She was sentenced to life, with eligibility for parole after 32 years. But for the Reeves family, there was no real closure. Julia struggled with guilt, haunted by the memory of her father insisting he was fine. Mara refused to step into the house again. Michael attended every hearing, determined to protect Daniel's legacy from the woman who had tried to erase it entirely. And even now, years later, neighbors still pause when passing the Reeves home on rainy nights, remembering the sirens, the silence, and the widow who stood motionless in the doorway as the truth began to unravel. Because in the end, the storm that night hadn't just drowned the street in water, it had washed away a mask Serena had worn with terrifying perfection. And when everything was finally exposed, the darkest part of the story wasn't the inheritance, the manipulation, or even the murder. It was how easily love can be weaponized. Sometimes the most dangerous secrets are the ones whispered behind closed doors, wrapped in promises, and delivered by the person we trust most. And in Daniel's case, the truth was exposed, but far too late to save him. Before you go, tell us in the comments, what do you believe was the first red flag? What moment convinced you this wasn't love, but a deadly plan? Your insights help others recognize danger before it's too late, and they shape the kinds of cases we dig into next. Do you think justice was truly served, or are there still secrets left buried? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you want us to continue exposing the world's darkest family secrets and betrayals, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story we bring to light.